Hello, wonderful people. I'm being impaled by the cryon up here. Welcome to JavaScript Marathon. I'm Justin Ribeiro. So good to see you here on week 337 of the current quarantine. Hope you're staying safe out there. Hope you're, learning a little bit about web performance, learning a bit about the web platform in general. It's been an epic ride, hasn't it? I believe this is the last one. Or will it be? I don't have the little switchy board that makes all the screen come through. I think it's funny that my children have a better streaming setup than I do. Like my kids are like, we know how to build all this stuff together. I'm just here to tell you about web platform things. That's the limit of my existing experience. So hey, let's talk about web platform things, shall we? Hey, web performance, always measure. We're talking about more measurement things today, particularly about how to continuously measure, how to deal with the fact that we've got a lot of things going on in our daily cycle of all things development. And we need to sort of track these things in a way that, quite frankly, does not make me required to be, fancy with the command line all the time. Though who doesn't love a good command line activity? Tickety tap, tap, tap. Ooh, it can be fancy. So, that apparently is not the right window. I just clicked and the slide didn't move. Top-notch slide performance right here. Who am I? If you're new to the stream, the previous episodes are down in the description below. Down there somewhere. But if you are unaware of me, hey, don't worry. I'm Justin Ribeiro. I'm still the EVP over here on Web Platform Engineering at this.labs. You can follow me at Justin Ribeiro at Twitter. I hear Twitter's a happening place these days. Woo. All the tweets. It's hard to keep up, really. At this point, I was shocked to find today was a Wednesday. Who knew? Who knew? But you can follow me over there on Twitter. If you have web performance questions and things, do feel free to ping me. You can also find me on the emails and whatnot off the website. If you're looking to have a more, private interaction as opposed to whatever Twitter is at this point. Is it private? I'm not sure. I'd have to check in with my 3 advisors, which are, well, my kids, because, let's be honest. They know more about this. And hey, you know what? We're talking about web performance training today, but do you find it hard to keep up with the consistently evolving technologies? Is it a struggle? I know it can be. So many things happen on the web platform every day amongst all the other platforms we happen to work on. So do you want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest and greatest technologies? Hey, this.labs offers personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. Contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. I feel like we should always be assessing our needs on a daily, as often as we can. Otherwise, we have a tendency to fall behind. And especially this time, in this trying time where we're all just trying to stay ahead of the curve, try to flatten one curve while trying to stay ahead of another. There's so many curves. Who can keep track of all these curves? I know I can't. So many graphs. Let's just use training as a means to get us there. So, sponsoring, obviously, us, because, hey, I'm running it here over this.labs. You can also follow this.labs on Twitter. See the little Twitter thing down there on the side? I don't know where my arms are. Everything is backwards on the camera right now. It's all complicated, confusing. So do follow us on Twitter. Hey, and this week's sponsor, if you had to guess it was coffee, you'd be correct. And if you had to guess that I forgot to change the picture on this slide from last week, you'd also be correct. But that's okay. She looks cute, with the cup of coffee when she was tiny. Yes, I let my tiny children drink coffee because that's the way to, look, this is pot number 2, 2.5. If we're being realistic today. Did I mention it's Wednesday? It's Wednesday. So before we get started into how exactly we're going to continuously measure all these things in all the places, let's talk about some general rules from last week. Number 1 rule to remember when talking about web performance. Hey, performance is relative. Don't use the "it's really fast on my machine" / my high-tech, just off the silicon production line phone that it's super fast. It's not that way for everybody. A is not necessarily equal to B. So make sure that you understand that your performance can be relative in a number of contexts pretty much all the time. across a wide range of things that we've previously discussed in previous episodes. Number two, performance is about perception a lot of the times. Just because the loading time is a same doesn't necessarily mean that everything is the same. Something that takes 10 seconds to load can be very different from something that still takes 10 seconds to load, but paints in the first second and shows you some interactivity by second 3. These are different things, and yet the timing might be the same. So don't discount the notion of perception. We're human. We've all learned a lot about perception lately, given that the fact that if you've been on a Zoom call with the skip stutter, at this point, everyone kind of thinks we're in the Matrix. That's the general perception of really poor video codec feeds. See, I kind of fibbed at the beginning. I do know a little bit about video codec feeds. Sorry. I'm sorry. It had to be said. And finally, Perf is about reduction. It's the web. We have constraints. A lot of platforms think they don't have constraints. All platforms have constraints of some type. And one of those constraints is you probably should just ship a little less. It's a lot about reduction. Send less JavaScript on the wire. Just do less work on the main thread. Don't spin up a thread and burn up somebody's phone for X number of days. Just don't do it. Don't do it. Because otherwise, I have to go and say, hey, please don't do that. I have other things to do. I don't want to have to, continuously say it. So, hey, web performance. A topic near and dear to all our hearts. And today we're going to talk about always measure, always. So in the previous episodes of things, we've talked a lot about the nature of the tooling. We've got dev tools, we have Lighthouse, we have a whole bunch of things in between. And we can measure at various steps in our process to sort of give us the nature of some numbers. And really, when we start to think about this, we're really talking about two types of measures. And well, there's realistically more types of measures, but there's really two that we care about. And I want to talk about those today and about the collection of those metrics to sort of give you a grander picture. Because as developers, we're going to run things local to us using the tools that we have. We have Lighthouse within DevTools. We have DevTools in all of our browsers. We can take traces and heap dumps and all kinds of things, and har files to show us what those network requests look like. All that stuff combines to give us a picture of how our code runs. And a lot of times we can think of that as the synthetic measure. So these are things that we run generally periodically. Like you may run them, I run them probably 15, 20 times a day, depending on what I'm trying to exactly track, whether that's an interaction within an isolated spot, within, some component somewhere, or if, you're trying to find something on, a QA site or some other thing that you're trying to test, you're probably running synthetic measures. You're trying to take perf tests against either the device that's sitting on your desk, so this is one device that I've got sitting right here, my Pixel, my old Pixel. That's right. Because when I test and use things, I use 4-year-old devices to make sure I'm getting the experience that most of my users are. Yeah, no fancy new devices for Justin. No. True story. So we're trying to take those measures against the things that we have, be it our emulation on our desktop or the device on our desk or the device lab that we have stacked somewhere across the board. And we want to run these tests periodically. So I'm going to talk about 4 things that I generally use to collect this stuff in most contexts now. So the newer portion of that, which I've talked about in the previous episode, was Lighthouse CI. So Lighthouse CI is, I'd say, step 1 in a scheme of things that you want to be able to do when you're running actual tests against code you're working on, rather. And this is your periodic check of the things that you're writing and are not causing detriment to your overall CI setup. So you can run this in any nature of ways. I'm not going to go into the finer points of setting this up today, much like I didn't go into the finer points of setting it up last week. But the general gist is, if you want to verify your performance on a per commit basis or whatnot, CI is a really good way to do it, whether it's pure Lighthouse CI or you're wiring into Travis or some other tooling subset. And I want to point out, too, that some people misunderstand a little bit about the nature of always run these things as code comes in. I get this question quite a bit, actually, about the nature of, well, is it real, right? And this is why I call them a synthetic, is because it's real. It's as real as you want to make it. So a lot of people go, well, I ran Lighthouse against, my local server that spun up in my particular CI instance. And, my scores were really solid. And my reaction to that is that a real world sort of experience, right? Is that the experience we're going to try that our users are going to have? They're not going to spin up your site local. Like, it's only going to give us the thing that, it's going to give us some information, but is it very good information? So a synthetic test, you want to be as close to the metal as you can get to where you want to be, whether that's testing against an emulated device or not, but also where that site actually lives. So when you're setting up these systems, be wary of just saying, well, I'm just going to run it against what is the easiest thing for me to set up, because it may not give you a very good gauge. And I've seen this a lot lately, for whatever reason. The other thing that I haven't really talked a lot about in previous things is the notion of site speed. So sitespeed.io is actually a really nifty tool that you can do a lot of performance trace tracking against. I use sitespeed quite a bit, actually, that you can pump data in through the collection of a lot of statistics about how a site not just performs, but a whole bunch of other particular metrics that are a little deeper into what we sort of want to yank out of DevTools. And sitespeed.io has a Lighthouse plugin at this point. There's always been a few that have been floated around. I had one that I never published that was really quite hacky, to be honest with you. But they have a really good Lighthouse plugin at this point. So if you want Lighthouse metrics among all your other metrics in Sitespeed, you can spin that up really, really quick now. I definitely recommend, if you haven't played with it, go grab the Docker container right now and just play with it. You can spin the Docker container out, tell it to run it against whatever site you want, and you will get this very report. You can see that I just ran this a few hours back to give some idea of just what it would look like, because I didn't have a more recent screenshot of this. So you can spin out the Docker container fast and decide how much of this you want to synthetically collect, not just against the base URL, but as many URLs as you want. So there's always plenty of things you want. We've talked a lot about just a base URL because we only have so much time in these little sessions. But at the end of the day, you want to have a collection of things that you want to find that are testing the things that are important to you. Again, it's relative. What's important to my site is not necessarily important to your site, which is not important to the production site that when I work on client things. Everyone has really specific targets, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. So sitespeed.io. Go spin it up. You'll have a good time with it. Very, very nice. Go back slide. If you don't want to set anything up and you just want to have a collection of synthetic stuff, there are many commercial services out there today, and I'm going to highlight the two of them that I particularly like. I have no commercial buy-in with this, nor does our company, but these are ones that I've used with a high degree of success to synthetically track a lot of results-based metrics out of things. One is Calibre. So it's a tool a company Ben had come up with. Ben had worked on web performance for a long time. It still does, obviously. Calibre lets you basically configure a whole bunch of specific tests around Lighthouse and other tooling to say, hey, you know what? Go collect these things, run them from various parts of the world, and return to me the results on whatever basis I want. So in this case, this little screenshot, you can see that I'm running Calibre from a snapshot earlier that I manually ran to go and say, hey, you know what? Fire up G4 and fire up a desktop and go and test these things across various points. So Calibre is a really nice little tool that will alert out and tell you when things just don't look quite right based on certain places in the world. So in this case, I think I was running this one from London. And again, like, I don't have to spin up anything. I go into Calibre, into my account, give it the URLs I want to do. It'll continuously test on whatever cycle I tell it to. And again, this is a commercial service, so it's not free. There is a free trial. I would definitely spin it up and see if it works for you. It's a very nice little tool. It has an API if you want to use it in other CI contexts and whatnot as well, or just on your command line. If you're like me and you just think, you know what, I could spend a little bit more time on my command line. I think we all could. Yeah, probably not. It's spring. It's sunny outside, though we have nowhere else to go now, do we? So Calibre, definitely take a look if you haven't seen it before. The other one, which is sort of your incumbent tool, I would say at this point, is Speed Curve. So Speed Curve, again, commercial tool. It's not free. There is a free trial if you want to give it a spin. Same sort of concept as Caliber. Like they have the same notion of running synthetics. You'll note very quickly in this screenshot is that Speed Curve specifically calls it a synthetic because that is what it is. It's testing against from various points in data centers against where your site is to give you, information you want. And in this case, you can see that I've got it pulling hero rendering times from Germany for the last few days. And again, site speed, it's been around for a while. It's a very good tool if you have a commercial, if you're in an org, you're thinking, you know what, I really want to get fine grained with this. Another good tool to pick. Again, all these things are just options on collecting a series of data that you would otherwise be running on a manual basis by hand. And again, there's nothing to say that you could not script this stuff. There's lots and lots of opportunity to design your own very specific Lighthouse sort of setup. That's kind of why I talk about Lighthouse CI and other things of that nature, because you can spin them into other things. So as we've seen in previous episodes, still down in the description down below, watch them later. Instead, watch me right now. We're talking about stuff. Don't leave yet. Just stay. We're getting to the good things. Actually, this is all good things. So it gives you the ability to build on top. So, and a lot of organizations, if your org has, again, very specific needs that you can't run these things external. In this case, I didn't talk about web page test. Technically, you can set up web page test as well against your own device lab internal to you. You can use that and have a collector as well. Most of these have collectors that go into things like Grafana and everything else. So there's no lack of ability to say, you know what, we just can't track these things. That's not an excuse. There are many, many tools that we have that are extensible and commercially viable, as well as in containers. And you all know I love the Docker containers. So if you can spin these up, you're in pretty good shape. So synthetics, again, they're designed to give you some sort of a baseline. Like, that it gives you a window into this. But at the same time, you do want to make sure the synthetic tests you're running are as close as you can to that metal, like the experience a user is going to see, which is why you'll note that when I ran the commercial variations of this in Site Speed and Caliber, I didn't pick Northern California where I am. That's of no use to me. I already know, generally speaking, exactly how my site performs from Northern California. But I'm not sitting in Germany and in a lot of cases, or London or Japan or in Sydney, and I want to see how that thing performs. I want my content and my applications to be as quick as they can across the globe. And this again goes to the fact that you have to be close to where your users are. Okay, well, what is your experience down there? Maybe my server has no edge in Sydney or in Singapore. Synthetic test will help you sort of lift those things up to say, oh, well, you know what? Our site seems pretty fast, but all of a sudden now in these certain regions, it's not. At which point you're probably thinking, maybe I have some engineering to do that is not necessarily site specific. Maybe that's the case. So you don't want them to be so fake as to not be useful. Don't have useful or fake numbers that are not useful. Just don't. Like, it'll just ruin your day. I see a lot of people cling to fake numbers because they think it makes them look good while their users suffer. This angers me immensely. Don't do this. Just don't. It's not a thing. You're not benefiting anybody. Just, again, be true to yourself. Know that, hey, you know what? It's not performing great. My users are probably having a much worse experience. If only there was a way we could measure that. That's called the segue. And that's called real user measures, or real user measurement, or real user metrics. At the end of the day, it all roughly translates to RUM. So I call this asking the user in a non-weird way, because realistically, we got a lot of tracking on the web today, as we've seen in some of the traces from random things I've traced. Third-party additions to the web can be just a little bit off-putting at this point. I think we could all agree on this. There's a lot of tracking going on. But the thing about it is that we do want to track performance in a real-world context. to large extents, that's what the Chrome User Experience Report is about in terms of instrumentation and telemetry and the anonymous data that we get, is that we can collect that information and go, wow, we're not delivering on the promise that the web should be delivering on, right? We want more speed. We want to have that better sort of setup for people. So we want to collect that stuff in real time too. We don't want just synthetic measures. And real user metrics are the sort of the next jump, right? You're going to start by taking synthetics because that's the easiest thing you can do as a developer or as a manager or as an organization to say, you know what, we can test this stuff ourselves. We have the ability to do so. But once you get into RUM, you're really talking about how am I going to do this without being like super tracky and really, really heavy and making sort of my user's experience even worse by the code that I'm trying to inject to make, things work. And so the thing about it is that if you have existing analytics in your site, the first thing I usually recommend is you should pump your analytics. Use what you have and do a little bit more. Send a little bit more information. And the reason for this is that one is that a lot of analytics engines already have the notion of web performance in them in various spots. You just kind of have to tease them out and find the thread that's going to loop through. So in Google Analytics, Google Analytics actually has this now. But the collector is a little bit weird, right? The collector says, well, I'm only going to give you, X amount of percent against this when you set it up. So you may not, if you're not having enough traffic through it, you might find that you're getting really, really bizarre numbers, right? Your histogram the tail looks really weird, right? So in that case, you're going, well, I can feed it more in. And I'll put a link down to Philip Walton's post on this because he had written sort of the definitive post early on, couple 3 years ago now, that is still relevant today for pumping things like Google Analytics with even more information. But when we talk about pulling timings, what exactly do I mean? So pulling timings, the nifty thing is that the web platform has many APIs to help solve all your performance needs. And one of those APIs is considered the Performance API and the Performance Observer API. So one cool thing that I do a lot is I love the performance APIs that we have. The newer specs are really nice. They have high risk timers in them. You can pull a lot of information out of them in terms of entry type. So you have things like paint and measure and things like long tasks and all the goodness that sort of tells us, hey, like what's going on. And the cool thing about this is that you can run snippets in DevTools either on the console or in this case, this is in the screenshot right here. We can see that it's basically just a little snippet I've written that just pulls paint timers, and these are just Chrome's paint timers straight away. So first paint, first contentful paint, things that I have not particularly set. That particular page load for whatever I was tracing, that's what their paint timings are. So in this case, you're saying, oh, cool, I could just I could send those along with a nice little analytical ping there. And indeed you can. But you can actually go a lot further. So if you have those interactive states that you want to track and you have those interactions where you're saying, you know what, I want to go beyond just a synthetic number of like, oh, I painted an X amount of seconds or, I had X amount of bytes on the wire. Again, it's relative, right? So we don't necessarily want all the same things. For me, a lot of times it's about interactive state. If I click a button, how long does the next thing take to come through? Which I would say is a pretty common paradigm for most people and most applications is, well, I've lazy loaded a route and I just click this button. How long did that thing actually now take to load? You can track that. And the reason you can track that is because we have something called the user timing API. So the user timing API goes beyond just saying, you know what, pull me a whole bunch of telemetry stack information out of DevTools in its various forms and various browsers. And at this point, this goes into the what's important to you relative notion of performance. Because not only will user timing surface in places like Lighthouse, it'll actually also surface in places like Google Analytics, as well as some, if you change the configuration, things like New Relic and whatnot, you can actually surface user timings there as well. And I know this because I've written a lot of bridges that do this. So you can pump timing data pretty much anywhere as long as you know what the target collector wants to do with it. And on the platform, you can do this in a number of ways. Request idle callback is a really good way to do this. Exit beacons as well when your user leaves and you don't want to block up the thread. You can use that as well. It's a great advantage to give you information you want fast. And in this case, the user timing API is something I see people kind of using, kind of not using. And it can be a little tricky because people have a tendency to over-measure things that you do not need to measure. You don't need to measure everything. You need to measure what's important to your end user experience. So go beyond just the synthetic measure. Start looking really at what's important. Where, if you're running an e-commerce site, you know what? Your performance goes a lot further than just that initial page load and paint now, doesn't it? Right? How long is it going to take me from get to product A to thank you, your order will be shipped in 2 to 4 weeks? I think all orders are shipped in 2 to 4 weeks now. I think that's the baseline. And you know what? Performance is relative. At this point, that could be pretty solid shipping time. So if you haven't looked at the user timing API, there's lots of documentation about the user timing API on MDN. There's also some on web.dev that I will put more links in down below. And then finally, when you talk about these things, you're saying, well, Justin, you just showed me a whole bunch of commercial tools that already do this. Like, what other commercial tools can I do that just make my life simple right now? Which is valid. You know, I understand that a lot of people have many things to track and many metrics they want to do. From the commercial offering standpoint, again, I have no horse in this race. I'm just telling you things that I've used, that we have used, that clients have used to good effect. Speed Curve Lux will give you real user measurement straight away. It is a little snippet you put into the thing. Firebase Perf, which I've showed in previous versions of this, is something I've been testing for probably the last, since it came into beta last year. Same thing. You add a snippet, it starts tracking certain metrics. Other tooling like New Relic and whatnot, they do have JavaScript-based APIs where you can automatically pull more of the user flow and user timings out. So if you have custom stuff, there's lots and lots of them. There are some better than others. I have fought with many of them. Many of them, the poor ones, I've already complained about in other things, and I won't commit that to video again because, well, there's blog posts for that. Doesn't mean you can't get around these things. If you find that you have a commercial tool that does not support these things, the key to remember is track the number that's important to you. If you have a user timing or you have a browser timing that is coming out of that thing, much like this previous screenshot, where you have the ability to pull entries and timing marks, the key is to consume those things in a way that you can send them to the thing you want to collect against. So real user metrics works the same way. This is where people get into trouble, is that they overcollect, they burden the user, they don't off-thread it, they don't use the beacon. And at that point, you're just spinning your wheels, much to the chagrin of a lot of those libraries, because a lot of those libraries do the exact same thing. And then I go and complain because they add 450 milliseconds of main thread burn time when you're trying to get something out the door to a user, just because they want to wrap all your JavaScript, which is painful. Run your own error trackers. So serviceable tools, lots of options. Don't be afraid to try them out. They all have trials, by the way. I definitely recommend trying the trial before deciding on a particular one. Try them all. See which one works best for your org. So if we've got synthetic measures and we've got real user measures, like why do I need either one of those, or why do I need both? This is a question that also comes up a lot, which is, well, if the devs are testing, I don't need to track these things because it'll automatically be fast everywhere for everyone. And if you're watching the stream right now, you're thinking, well, Justin, didn't you have some rules at the beginning of this that basically said that was, not exactly true? You would be indeed correct. The reality is that it's a bit of a false dichotomy. It's not black and white. There's not either or. There's not these things that they both support each other in an ability to help you make decisions. Because at the end of the day, you will have to make decisions. You will have to decide well, the synthetic runs look pretty clean, but we've got clearly a bug in userland where, this is just not giving us the experience our users want. This is why you run both sets of these metrics. And if you're a developer or manager who's trying to get approval for things like this in your organization, um, do reach out, because there's lots and lots of case studies where we've sort of seen the lay of the land, as have many of the larger organizations. Again, this is why for a lot of developers, when they see the articles about, oh, JavaScript is slow because of this, why we're destroying the web with, ginormous, terrible images and whatnot. Those are backed by data. Like, these are not people's opinions. Might be an opinion, but it's backed by data. You have to be cognizant of these things. The moment you take your eye off the ball, you stop tracking them, is the moment you suddenly start to lose your conversion rate in most cases. This is, again, not my opinion. If you just look at the data, it's clear as day that every second you burn trying to do something you shouldn't be, and the fact that you didn't track that real user experience, and all of a sudden you're like, the numbers look great, and I'm like, you've lost 25% of your user base. That's why this slide exists, is because if you don't do these two things, track your synthetics, continuously keep your fingers on the pulse of what your site is doing, you're going to generally have a pretty bad day. So, synthetic metrics, real user metrics, measure them both. Use the tools. Tools are there. I noticed that someone said site speed in the chat. Let's see, Docker versus npm. They run I'm a fan of Docker only because I run 27 million containers. I really, really dig containers. So, to your question, Lars, yeah, there's nothing wrong with running the npm version of site speed. If you've got npm set up and you've got an environment you're comfortable running it in, fire it up. I use Docker containers mostly so that I can also test a whole bunch of stuff at once, so I don't have to remember exactly what I had locally installed. Containers sort of give me the layout, and again, but that's just me. I run a lot of containers. This very version of Chrome that we're talking in and live streaming in is also in a container. Yeah. All the containers, all the things. So a lot of the times, when you walk through these things as well, when you set these tools up in your environments, things like CI and whatnot, work where you are. Don't feel like you have to set up an entire new set of infrastructure as we sort of travel through stuff. So my open source stuff, I use GitHub Actions, which I've shown previously in the past. That uses my Lighthouse action plus my container plus my other Chrome container. You can combine the things I have into something that is useful. I don't have to spin up a brand new CI. Similarly speaking, I have stacks and stacks of other clients and whatnot who use various systems that they have that we just bolt these things into. Same thing with language choice. Like, a lot of this stuff, you're going to say, well, I'm going to write this in JavaScript because fundamentally in the browser, you need to run the JavaScript to do it. But that doesn't mean you actually can't wire into things like Lighthouse and CDP through, like the GoLib, if you really want something that's slightly different or something that's specific to your environment. There are lots of wrappers out there, lots of API documentation. CDP you can pull stuff out of, which I'm sorry is the Chrome Dev Tools protocol, which for the most part is ideally going to be standardized. Here, let's hope that pans out. So you end up with a lot of these things. But yeah, don't fight your infrastructure, which is why as you start to test tools like this, you have to decide straight away exactly where it's going to fit for you, and it will be different from everybody else, which is why there are 35 million examples in the various site speed or Lighthouse or npm repo documentation and whatnot. Same thing with the Puppeteer stuff. A lot of these things you can run in Puppeteer. I have examples in the GitHub repo if anybody wants them. Similarly speaking, Addy released a whole bunch of examples last week, I think, of automation-ish things with Puppeteer that you can do. Some of which is Lighthouse-based. Other things is just the usual stuff that you might already be doing with end-to-end testing or pulling traces through Puppeteer. It's going to vary a lot. Those are the simplest ways to run because, again, you can run those with npm. You don't have to spin anything up. So that has been 35 minutes of me talking about two types of performance testing and whatnot. This is the scratch surface variation of this training session. There is a lot more depth that you can go into once you've made a path choice, which is important why you should make a path choice. Have a conversation in your org, decide what works best for you. And then if you have questions or where that integration might fit, that's when, you either A, go through the documentation, or B, you ping me on Twitter. We have a conversation about it and say, hey, we'll make your stuff fast. And speaking of which, if you found any of this particularly helpful, if you're thinking to yourself, man, I too would very much like automated tooling setups, we could do that. But also, if you just like to learn what is particularly right for your org, again, like a lot of these general concepts seem like a good fit, but how do you, sort of do that? You're in luck. We can help train you on that very thing. I can look at your stack, look at your systems and say, you know what? This one right here is the hot ticket item. And if you'd like to, we're now doing virtual corporate trainings because at this point, I'm pretty sure we're all virtual. Is this room virtual right now? Am I on a green screen? No. I'm basically half in a closet right now, but the closet has a window, so it works out. So if you have questions, do let us know here over at this.labs. We can help you set up all your training particular needs. And if you found this interesting, make sure to like and subscribe down below, because if I don't say that, my kids, throw rubber chickens at me. Is that still a comedy thing? Probably still a comedy thing, I presume. It's still 1973, right? Yeah, it's fine. But this has been another episode of Web Performance. I hope you found it interesting. If you do have questions, ping me on Twitter, Justin Ribeiro. You can find me there. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. Stay safe out there. Keep testing those sites. Keep the web performance up. I believe in you. We all believe in you. The platform believes in you. We can do it. Let's make the web fast. Thanks and have